And we're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. It's been some crazy week here. A lot of things happening on the internet seem to be around my channel and myself. And I'm joined by Abdullah Gondal here. And we have quite a topic today. The Quran, multifaceted perspective we're going to look at. We're going to look at plagiarism, preservation, linguistics, mythology, convenient revelations, morality, Muhammad's mental state. There's a lot to cover. Abdullah Gondal, how's it going?
Hi. Oh, I've been great. Just been away for the past little while, life and school catching up. But yeah, I'm coming back after quite a gap.
Oh, yeah.
So today's live stream, what I want to focus on is the claim that Muslims push forth constantly that the Quran is some unique, amazing book, like it is the best evidence of Islam. It is the greatest miracle of God, a timeless miracle. And I don't understand where the overconfidence comes from. When you actually read the Quran, it is a mess. It is a complete mess. Like, it is a very mediocre text. So what I want to start off with is, I'll give you a brief synopsis of what I'm going to do today. I'm going to go through the surah like it claim and see how that feeds up to or stands up to what it says. Then I'm going to go debunk a little bit of linguistic miracles, especially chiastic structures. Those ring compositions, people before Muhammad used it, and it was his contemporaries. We will go through all of that. After that, I will go briefly over the shady preservation of the Quran, or at least it not being perfect as one would expect from a perfect God. Okay. After that, we will also go into a few revelations of convenience just to show how Muhammad at certain times manipulated people to his worldly gains. Now, this is not questioning his sincerity at this point. Like, was he actually believing his lies or not? Was he delusional? That's not the point. The point is the manipulation did happen. And it's very similar. We'll show real life examples from today's world where an individual did exactly the same thing Muhammad did 14 centuries ago. And it'll be remarkable. After that, after the revelation of convenience, I want to just touch upon what the Quran can provide us for a 21st century evolving society that has different, more moral needs from what 7th century Arabia was. After all of that is done, we'll glance on the claim that Muhammad actually had never heard of these stories from the Gospel or the Talmud, so the claim of plagiarism. So we'll go through the where and who and how did Muhammad actually hear these stories. And in fact, he was hearing these stories before he even believed himself to be a prophet. And I'm not joking, and this is all in your books. After that, we were going to go glance over some mythology in the Quran, which also has roots in past ideologies, okay? And then we will also address the idea of why you cannot reduce the Quran to mere fables. Because as soon as you claim these are all metaphorical stories, you are no different than the Quraysh when they said, Asatirul Awwalin, that these are the stories of the ancients. After that, we are going to go take a small dive into the hate found in the Quran. All the insults towards disbelievers, whatnot, the graphic descriptions of hell. And at the very end, what we will do is we will go through a little bit of how Muhammad got the revelation, what his condition was, and what has been reported to us. Now, I have a very specialized, very specific presentation in the works. It's all about neuroscience of Muhammad, okay? It's going to be at least 60, 70 slides. I will go through details in that one. Okay, I will dispel the myth that these epileptics are just dysfunctional people throbbing at the mouth having tonic-clonic seizures. No, that's just the movie depiction of a seizure. Okay, we will go through a little bit of that, and at the end, when we tie it all up, you will for sure know that the Quran is not from God. It is definitely not from God. And let's get into it. So, if you guys remember, about a couple of years or a year ago, we uploaded this surah Faqaf, right? And obviously got criticism from a few people, especially a famous YouTuber named Farid. And also, he uploaded a video on Ali Dawa's channel. Now, to their let's say their thinking, they thought that they refuted the video, but in fact what they didn't realize that the surah was imitating the Quran in ways they can perceive not, and they bit the bullet. Okay,
Yeah.
so let's go through the surah like a challenge first, then I'll show you some problems with the Quranic version of it and how the challenge itself makes no sense. So number one, the challenge is not defined at all. Okay, the Quran doesn't tell you what will constitute meeting the challenge. The Quran just says, bring a surah like it and you won't be able to do it. That's it. The overconfidence is amazing. So not only the Quran doesn't provide any guidelines, the scholars are also arguing what would constitute. The Muslims don't know, and it's on its own, in its essence, a subjective challenge and can be reduced to a challenge of perception of beauty of language. Now think about it. This God is doing miracles upon miracles, suspending the laws of physics, and his last miracle is a book of poetry in a very specific language, in a very specific form, subform of that language, classical Arabic. Okay, so that doesn't make sense. Now, one of the things I want to go in, one of the problems was, or the claims launched against Surah Faqaf was that we were borrowing from the Quran. But did you know that Muhammad indeed borrowed from previous poets? Okay, and you can find the muwallaqat, the odes. Okay, and not only do you see the Quranic style being shown again and again, you actually sometimes see whole verses lifted out. Okay, so I'll just show an example from a
problem with using language, right? That your language has to come from something, and if that's how they're using the language in a very human way, like God using the same language would have to use pieces of words that exist, which again makes you wonder what kind of challenge is that, because the challenge is always going to be limited to language. So how could language ever be divine?
Exactly, and language keeps evolving, right?
Yeah.
And we will get to the foreign words and how it philosophically just nullifies the whole challenge. Okay?
Someone quickly, just to quickly say, someone once asked me, well, what would you accept as a miracle then if you don't accept the Quran? And it's simple: God speaking to us in a language that nobody understands, yet we understand it. That would be an undeniable miracle right there. A book in a language that nobody can speak, yet we all can understand it. You know what I'm saying? So that there's so many ways, you know, a real God
could have imagined, yeah.
There's so many ways.
So like, just to show you a few examples, and you have, I'll put everything in the links below. But if you notice here, have you seen this before in the Quran? فَلَا تَكْتُمُونَ اللَّهَ مَا فِي نُفُوسِكُمْ. Okay, very similar to Quranic phraseology. Now, what I also wanted to show you guys is
Malakat.
Yes, this is from the Muwallaqat. Yes, Bukran Bukura. These kind of repetition styles are Quranic styles as well. In Dakkan Dakka, Kidu Kaida, Saffan Saffa, another style that you're getting from pre-Islamic courts. And I can keep showing you words upon words where I'll show you this this identical lift from another poet, and the words actually occur in the surah 69, I believe. Yeah, like they occurred word to word like this. Ala arja'iha. Okay, if you can see that.
Yeah.
Well, these are just a few examples, and we have a lot to cover. Like I can show you other examples. Like I've highlighted a few. Laysa biha minhum.
So what is the significance of these similarities of the Quran using phrases from pre-Islamic poetry? What's the big deal? Why is that a problem?
So this ties back into the challenge, right? And one of the problems is with language is because you are tied in a certain set of rules of either vocabulary or grammar and sentence structures or expressions, okay, or form of expression. Now, it's in one way to approach it, it's inevitable because you're using the same language or similar language, you will eventually end up expressing yourself in similar ways. Or you can just say that we're ripping it off. And what I'm trying to bring back to is Surah Faqaf, where some things can only be expressed in a certain way. So saying that, oh, it was championed by the Quran as the first one, that's the problem.
So the problem is the Quran is claiming to be inimitable. It's claiming to be a distinct, unique speech that nobody can copy.
Exactly.
Yet it's copying pre-Islamic poetry.
Exactly. Now, what I also want to show you guys is there are actual pre-Islamic poetries or verses. Like we uploaded a video where I recited about, I think, 3-4 different poems from either before Muhammad, around his time. And one of them is what we named as Surah Shariq, which was from I think a female poet. And it literally has the same words as the Quran. It sounds very similar. You can look at the whole video. I recited it in the Quran style. It goes like, وَاللَّيْلِ الْغَاسِقِ وَاللَّوْحِ الْخَافِقِ وَالصَّبَاحِ الشَّارِقِ وَالنَّجْمِ الطَّارِقِ. That's the same star that the Quran mentions in Surah Najm. Surah Tariq, sorry. وَالنَّجْمِ الطَّارِقِ وَالْمُزْنِ الْوَادِقِ إِنَّ شَجْرَ الْوَأْدِ لَيَأْدُو خَطْلًا وَيَحْرِقُ وَالنِّيَابَ أَصْلًا وَإِنَّ صَخْرَ الطُّودِ لَيَنْزِرُ ثَغْلًا لَا تَجِدُونَ عَنْهُ مَعْلًا. It's very similar to the Quran. And in fact, if you go on that video, you will actually see an actual academic who wrote a long comment, and he also admitted that the Quran has remarkable resemblance to such poetry, especially when you examine surahs like the beginning of Surah Mursalat or Adiyat or Surah Tur. The wordings, the type of oaths taken by God, very similar, okay? Now, what is very important, now we're going to switch a little bit, and we're going to go to what the Quran does to maintain or force rhymes. So in Surah Mu'minun, Surah 23, I believe, it says, Turi Sina, the Mount of Sina, okay? But in Surah Teen, that becomes Turi Sinin. Why? The only thing that comes to mind is it's a spelling change just to maintain a rhyme. Now, this doesn't happen once, though. If it was a one-off thing, it'd be okay. But in Surah 37, okay, I believe it's between verses of 120 and 140, where Allah goes, Salamun ala Ilyas, and then Ilyasin. Within a span of 10 to 15 words, Ilyas becomes Ilyasin just to maintain the rhyme again. Now, what I also want to show you, and this is very important, is how the Quran will create words, like literally invent words to hold rhymes. And sometimes it will just take foreign words and attach its own meaning. The question coming back is, if the Quran and Muhammad could do this, well, shouldn't anybody be allowed to do this, whoever is attempting the challenge? So let me just find you the part where we will open Surah Insan, and we will show that there's 2 verses back to back that are foreign. So if you go to verses 70, so Surah 76, verses 17 and 18. While I look for my part to show from a book on linguistics, so what those words are. Okay. So were you able to find the verses, Samir?
76, 17 to 18, yep, it's on the screen.
Yeah, can you recite them for me? Hello?
Yeah, sorry. وَيُسْقَوْنَ فِيهَا كَأْسًا كَانَ مِزَاجُهَا زَنْجَبِيلًا عَيْنًا فِيهَا تُسَمَّى سَلْسَبِيلًا.
Now what's interesting is both the words at the end, zanjabila, salsabila, are both made up words. They're not from the Arabic language. And what I will show you is I'll share my screen, and there you go. And you will see this Arthur Jeffries book.
Mhm.
You can see it where my arrow is. Words which are entirely non-Arabic. And he seems to have invented words. Ghassak, Tasneem, Salsabil, Zanjubil. They're foreign words being used to maintain rhymes. Okay? Now, what I will also show you is the detail about some other words that happen to be the same. So, for example, if you go to Surah 80, verse 31,
8031. Okay. Yeah, someone's saying don't make me read Arabic again because it's been
okay. Okay, so now I'm going to screen share something again with you guys. Okay, and this is the word Abba. Okay, it occurs only in a Meccan surah. They were puzzled by the word as usual because Muhammad had a knack for inventing words. What also is important that the Quran keeps telling people that it's in clear Arabic, and there's a verse that says Haza Arabi wa Ajami, that the messenger is Arabic, but there's foreign words, and this was an objection of the kuffar as well. So the Quran goes to great lengths that it's very clear. But as you can see, this word is again made up, like they're kind of not sure what it's doing. Now, what we will also do is we can keep showing words and words and words. Like this is a whole book full of foreign words, invented words. Like I'll give you a few other examples, like the word qaswara, tasneem in 83:27, ghassak in Surah 113:3, the word illiyin, illiyun, the word ma'un. These are all words that really didn't mean anything, and he was kind of signing. And these are also pivotal holding rhymes. Now, what a person asks then, if Muhammad or whoever, Allah, is writing this Quran, can use this form of manipulation of language, that liberty should extend to anybody who is attempting that challenge, right? So why can't I take a word from Urdu to put at the end of my Arabic sentence to maintain a rhyme like Muhammad did? And there's hundreds of words, and these words are written, documented by Muslims themselves. Like Suyuti's Itqan is full of this. Okay, I already showed you that how the phraseology is similar and stuff. What now I want to get to is random words, just there with no real meaning to hold the rhyme. So let's go to Surah 69. Verse 17. If Shamir, can you show that?
Sure.
So we can see it says Wal malaku ala arjahiya. Remember that word from the muallaq I showed? Ala arjahiya, literally word to word that. And at the end you say Wa yawma idhin thamaniya. Throne of your Lord above them. And then it just randomly has the word 8. Does it matter how many angels carry God's throne? Does he even need angels to carry it? What's the point of having the number there? It's literally just to hold the rhyme. It has no theological importance.
Yeah.
Okay. Once we go through this, I mean, now I want to get to some words, well, just some Quranic ineloquence, okay? And by that, I mean some verses that just baffle people. Like they're so poorly composed. For example, 1760. If you were to open that verse.
Yeah. And credit to Hassan Radwan for mentioning this in one of his older videos, eh?
Yes. And also there's an amazing book he translated, My Ordeal with the Quran. It's written by an Egyptian scholar, actually, under a pseudonym, and he translated that into English. The point of this is, this verse, Surah 10, verse 20 to 23, 699, 43, is the ineloquence in terms of jumping of pronouns, switching of words, being unclear. Like, look at the verse. And we did not make the site which we showed you except as a trial for people. Then suddenly talking about a tree, then we threaten them. What is going on here? Okay, like this could have been worded in so many better ways. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, you can open another example. Actually, the Surah 10, verses 22, 23. All right. Yeah, so 22 to 23.
Okay.
Yeah, for those two. So if you notice here, it is he, so it starts in a different pronoun. And when you are in the ships, it goes into we, should say. So what's happening here in these two verses, what we call as iltifat. Okay?
They didn't show it in a translation.
Yeah.
I think that's what happened here. I'm gonna check it out.
So what ends up happening is you're switching from a plural to a singular tense, like he, we, I, we. And if anybody in normal Arabic were to speak like this, they would be told to go get their grammar freshened up or take a few courses in grammar, because that's not how proper Arabic is. But because this is in the Quran, and the Quran can apparently violate grammar rules, or apparently it created grammar rules, these exceptions are made. One asks again, why can't I, attempting the challenge, violate certain rules of grammar or certain spelling rules, force some rhymes, and make something that sounds like this? The whole idea is this is a very, very, very subjective and very poorly ill-defined challenge. Okay.
Yeah, and the Quran itself is as a specimen. It causes scholars to have to come up with like obscure ways to fix this. So like, for example, in the translation, it doesn't even show this. And Hassan Radwan's originally actually highlighted the differences, but here they don't show you the he and the we switching in the translation. And so the scholars have to save the Quran from itself because it can't be wrong, right? Like the Quran can't be wrong, so it must be an understanding that's wrong.
Exactly.
It's not a fair judgment. It's a biased judgment where you've already presupposed the Quran is true. And that's what Islamic scholars do, right? The presuppositionalists, they've already come to the conclusion that the Quran is from Allah. So therefore, these are not problems. They can't be problems, right? It's like I keep getting told, no, you idiot, Alexander was not a monotheist, so he can't be Dhul-Qarnayn. I'm like, yes, I know. That's the point. It's a contradiction. No, you're wrong. It can't be him. So if you start from the basis that the Quran has to be right, then all of these problems just go away.
If you start viewing it from a presuppositionalist believer's lens, you will want to believe. You will do ICGs. You'll fit, and your bias will drive your examination of the book. As soon as you examine it from a critical lens, this book just crumbles. It just crumbles to shreds. One other thing I wanted to show you, and are a few grammatical, not say errors, but let's say lapses in the Quran. And I'll show you a post of mine I did, and just one of them. Okay, and I will also show you what Jalaluddin al-Tabari had to say, and he actually acknowledged that what the correct sentence structure could be and how it should have been. So, and let me find that. Okay, so your entire screen. So, if you can see, it starts with alladhi, as in a singular.
Yes, there you go.
And then binurihim, their light left him. Okay. Now people have weird ways of like fixing this mistake, but what I'm trying to get to is if somebody in normal Arabic spoken or any other form were to express themselves this way, they will be mocked and they wouldn't be given the same luxury or the pile of excuses to justify themselves. And what's also interesting is if you look at Tafsir al-Tabari here, he literally says the same thing. How can this be where one is singular and the other is the plural? And he literally gives you the correct word how it should be. مثلهم كمثل الذين استوقدنا. So again, point being that the Quran is not free from error as Muslims propagate it to be. Okay. one of the other, and before we move on to another topic, is this challenge has been attempted by a lot of people before. It's not new. Abu Ala al-Mari wrote a whole book like Fusul al-Ghayat. There have been scholars that have criticized the Quran as well. So to some of the surah like a challenge, the Quran the Quran uses foreign words to forced rhymes. The Quran changes word spellings to forced rhymes. The Quran has violations of standard rules. The Quran has exceptional rules just for the Quran only. Keeping all of this in mind, the challenge makes no sense. If Muhammad can use foreign words, well, where's the limit? The problem occurs, right? Where do I stop? How many foreign words can I use?
And then, like, if you use the Quran as an example, like in the Quranic challenge, no, you're plagiarizing it. Well, what do you want us to do? Come up with Shakespeare in Chinese? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, what's
exactly?
What's the challenge?
So one of the reasons, like, if you were to watch Surah Faqaf, one of the things point like the dollar and the dinar are exactly borrowed because Muhammad borrowed from hundreds of words from other languages, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things.
Yeah.
Again, let's move on to a slightly different topic now. Let's get to the linguistics, and this gets very interesting, and this is about the style of expression, okay? What's interesting is if you've heard the claim that Ayatul Kursi is this big miracle of Allah, and that it is a ring composition, and that Surah Baqarah is a ring composition, and that this is evidence that it could only be from Allah. Guys, this chiastic structure, the employment of chiastic structure, is a literary device that has been extensively used before Islam in other pieces of literature, to the point where Muhammad's competitors, poets, pre-Islamic poets, literally use that. And if you don't believe me, let me show you. Okay? All right. Application, your entire screen. Okay. So I will first go up to the topic. So this is a paper. We will put this in the link. You can read the whole thing. I want to go, this is an actual academic review of Imrul Qais's poetry, is page number 4, yes. And he actually notices a lot of similarities, and a lot of the themes are actually similar. You can go read the whole thing, but what I want you to see of particular note is that both texts are ring compositions, a fact which points to structural parentage between the surah and the qasida, okay? The point I'm trying to make that pre-Islamic poets were using ring composition. The whole linguistic miracle claim falls flat. Okay, I'll just debunk one other linguistic miracle claim and then closing remarks on this and move on.
The ring thing, basically, the ring pattern is basically that the first verse and the last verse have, talk about the same thing, and then the second one
at the center. Yeah.
Okay.
It's nothing miraculous.
Like, really? That's
exactly
proof for God. Seriously.
So one could also infer that, wow, did Muhammad just copy the poet's style of poetry? Or you understand where I'm going with this, right? Yeah. So the point being here is I'll debunk one more, is certain miracles, and these certain linguistic miracles are only very specific to certain recitations of the Quran, okay? And a lot of these numerical miracles fail too by this. One of the things that happens is, for example, take the miracle that Numan Khan said, that وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا, okay? That in the Hafs reading of the Quran, in Surah Baqarah, there are 286 verses, and the 143rd verse lands on this verse which says, we have made you a middle nation. But what's fascinating is other rivayas of the Quran, like the Warsh, they don't have that same numbering. Oh, the middle kind of is elsewhere. So the miracle fails, right?
And this actually breaks all of the mathematical miracle claims.
Exactly. There are words missing. Like I will show you those.
What does that mean? A different rivaya of the Quran, like a different, what is that?
So post Osman, there what Sunni Muslims claim that the Gabriel gave Muhammad the Quran in 7, 8, 10, sometimes some say 14. They're not even sure about this. They normally consider these 10 people who have orally transmitted the Quran from their teachers, so like Hafs from Asim, Warsh from Nafi, and it's their readings of the Quran that trickle down to us. And they have slight variation where some of them have different pronunciations. Some say qala, some say qul, some have a whole word huwa missing. Sometimes the meaning is affected, sometimes it's not, but it definitely shows that to make these miracles work, you have to really cherry pick certain variants and discard others. But the problem is all of these variants in traditional Sunni thought is accepted to be all equally valid. And in fact, the Hafs Quran that we read right now wasn't canonized in its official form till the 1920s in yeah. So since we are done with the linguistics, now what I wanted to point out was anybody who reads the Quran will see the disjointedness in the text. It is something nobody can miss. Like Jared Poin, every academic will tell you, like there's jumps, there's topic shifting. I did a breakdown of Surah 33. What I will do is I'll pull that up on my screen in a second. And I just want to show you guys how much the Quran jumps topic from topic, and it almost becomes unreadable at times. All right, so let's share the screen. And if you guys can't read, I'll zoom in for you guys.
Yeah, okay, that's good, that's good.
Yeah. So I did a breakdown of the division of verses from chapter 33, because I find chapter 33 to be one of the deepest dives into the troubled mind of Muhammad. But as you can see, like just look at this. The first 3 verses, obey Allah, generic. Oh, adoption's banned. Oh no, the Prophet's closer. And then the random deal with Noah, Ibrahim. Oh, some random threats. A few verses about the battle expedition of Battle of Ahzab. Oh, follow Muhammad. More unbelievers and hypocrites, wives, and then it comes like he's talking about his wives and their own problems, and suddenly Allah's verses. There are these random jumps, and it's so disjointed that this amount of disjointedness, because I study neuroscience, I have examined this amount of disjointedness in texts that are result in hypergraphia that come from either epileptics or schizophrenics. And it is a very understood, well-studied topic, and there's a very good case to be made with the Quran as well. And we will get into a little bit of that later. Okay, I will show you neuroscience studies that show how having epilepsy can actually cause you to produce verses in rhyme or compulsive rhyming. And I've met people in my whole life where they will have an episode, and as soon as they are done, they start writing poetry. It's amazing. And it's so similar as to how they jump in topics. But as you can see, like it's like Muhammad's the seal of the prophets, and jumps to he can marry as many slaves and have as many women, and divorces his marries his adopted son's wife. Then there at the end is like praise Muhammad, Allah, curse. It's very, very mediocre. Like the text itself, and viewed from a broader, wider perspective, it's not unique or jaw-dropping in any sense of the word. Now that we've covered the linguistics a little bit, the disjointedness, the surah like a challenge being really not even a challenge, let's move on to what I would call next is the preservation of the Quran. And why I want to touch upon this is a lot of Muslims pride themselves that the Quran is so perfectly preserved, and most Muslims, the lay Muslim doesn't even know about the different riwayahs of the Quran, the textual variants, the manuscripts differing. They have absolutely no clue. In fact, big scholars like Maududi in their Tafhim al-Quran will literally make these claims that you can go to any part of the world and grab any Quran, it'll be identical. It's just blatantly false. Okay, so we will go through that, but first thing what I want to do is, and I did a whole presentation on it, and this is about a good 2.5 hours long. If you want, it's called it's on YouTube as was the Quran perfectly preserved. So what I will do is I'll pull that presentation up and just give you a few examples, just so you guys know what I'm talking about.
That was a live stream you did?
Yes, the live stream we did. So I'll just go over just a couple manuscript things.
Okay.
Okay, so let's see. Let me make it full screen. Actually, so what happened is they found this thing called the Sana Quran, and underneath it was a lower text they could extract with UV lights. What they found was quite interesting. Is if you, oops, that's not what I meant.
You have to zoom in on the Google. Oh, at the top left, the button near the down.
There you go. Okay, so what they found was that in the text of the C1, like there are words missing where the word ru'usakum isn't even found in the manuscript. فَإِنْ كَانَ أَحَدٌ, one says, the other says فَمَنْ كَانَ.
So why is it important? What is this? What are we looking at here?
The point is I'm trying to show you is that the preservation of the Quran is got human fingerprints all over it. Okay. What we're trying to do is we're trying to examine the book from a few different critical perspectives, and at the end tie it all together to show you that it's definitely not from God. So what I'm trying to show you is there's a bunch. This is from Benham and Ben Ghazi Mohsen, I think, and then even to the point where the whole sentence structure just flips at times. The words are different. All those are interchangeable. Point being that yes, it's not as perfect as it's touted to be. We can go into more detail, like there's like full-on words missing. I'm gonna glance a little bit over the Samarkand Quran, where some words are missing here. I have done a whole presentation. You can go do that. View that. Now what I want to get to is the variants in the modern Quran. And what I was talking about earlier, if you notice, is one is Warsh, one is Hafs, there's Duri, Susi, Khalaf, and a bunch of Qurans and a bunch of variants. If you see that one has Hua, one doesn't have the word Hua in it, the singular plural, Kutubihi, Kitabihi, Kafir, Kuffar, Yuqtulun, Yuqatilun, quite a bit. Fabima, Bima, the wow is missing.
Sana manuscript now?
No, these are just the current Qurans. The current Qurans we can purchase. Yeah, so these are the variants in the modern Quran, right? Yeah, now what I wanted to go to is Kitab al-Masahif.
So this is significant. I need to point this out because it might gloss over some people. What we're saying is there's multiple variant readings of the Quran that exist today that are agreed upon. So we're not talking about manuscripts anymore that are like disagreed upon or whatever. We're talking about actual Quran that people read in mosques in all over the world. In Egypt, for example, they might be reading Warsh more. In Saudi, they're probably reading Hafs. And these are actually differences in the language, in the words, and there's different words, different ordering of words. Is that right? And stuff like and also words missing.
Yeah. Numbering is different. Sometimes the arrangement.
Number of words is different. Number of verses is different.
Yeah.
All of this is in agreed upon Quran. Then it makes you wonder, like, what's the point of? Why would God want to do this? It just causes confusion and chaos, if anything, right?
Yeah.
But a human being, on the other hand, when it comes to a human work, a human preservation, that's exactly what you expect to see, a fragmentation when it comes, especially in a pre-literate society where, writing was uncommon, writing on sheepskins and backs of shoulder blades of animals and rocks and stuff like that, and then they're wiping it out and using it again. And so this is what we expect with a human effort. So this is what Abdullah Gondal is pointing out, that this has human fingerprints all over it.
Exactly. Now, what I wanted to go
before we go any further, someone was asking about was it Surah 17? Was it revealed all the one that was jumping around? Surah Ahzab, I guess, Surah 33. Was it
like if you were actually to go into the details, like Surah Ahzab apparently allegedly used to be much longer. Okay, it was about hundreds of verses longer, but then they forgot it. And we go into the reference, the hadith, we show it all. And the point being is that the incoherency in the text, even if it's not revealed at the same time, it shouldn't be there. You only find a couple of chapters in the Quran that have some chronological flow, but most of them are just.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Even if it wasn't all at once, you would expect it to have a flow if it's coming from one source, which is God, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a good point. So let's continue. Sorry for interrupting.
Okay. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was Kitab al-Masahif. And there's Suyuti's Itqan al-Fahris too. And this is the same book that Yasir Qadi was talking about in his leaked emails. And this book is very extensive, and it documents the variants that were recorded in early Muslim times about the Quranic verses. And it gives you claims that there are different Sahaba who had different codices. So there's the Codex of Ubay, there's the Codex of Ibn Abbas, there's Ibn Masud, and they all had not only differences amongst themselves, but differences from Osman's Quran. And this is literally a scandalous book. What I will do, I will share the screen.
It's an Islamic book, right?
Yeah. It's written by the son of the son of Abu Dawood. Yeah. Ibn Abu Dawood.
When you say the emails of Yasir Qadi, what you're talking about was the leaked email that Dawa Man posted online that was Yasir Qadi sending to a small group of enlightened knowledge retreat, special mailing list he has for like a small group, where he actually admitted that the Quran's preservation wasn't exactly what people think it is, what Muslims believe it is. And this caused a huge controversy when this email came out, because I mean, some people think Yasir Qadi is like a disbeliever because of some of the things he's saying now.
Yeah, and why?
From this book.
Sorry?
He mentioned this book, right?
Yes, he mentions this book by name, and I'm just showing you a picture from it. This is from Ibn Mas'ud's Codex, I believe. And if you notice, like what I've done is the red is his reading and the yellow is the normal Quran. But if you notice, in Surah Al-Asr, like this guy is saying, "Wal asr innal insana lafi khusr wa innahu fihi ila akhir ad-dahr illa allazina amanu wa amilus salihat wa tawasaw bis-sabr." The bil haqq wa bis-sabr is missing, I think, and then this whole phrase is extra. And I mean, their variants go crazy. Like it's a book just full of Quranic variants. And I can show you the other variants as well from Ibn Ubay's Codex and stuff, but like we can't get into too much detail because we have a lot of stuff to cover. Now, what I want to bring to, keeping all of this in mind, I want to show you a couple of hadith, okay? There you go. So before I show the hadith, Samir, can you do me a favor and pull up Surah 87, verses 6 to 7?
Okay.
Now, in this verse is something very important to notice. سَنُقْرِئُكَ فَلَا تَنْسَى إِلَّا مَا شَاءَ اللَّهُ. Allah will make you recite the Quran and you will not forget it, except what Allah wills. So, even if Muhammad forgot the Quran, it comes back to Allah made him forget. And if you Google, if you actually go to sunnah.com and just write "made me forget," he's literally telling people, if you forget the Quran, don't say I forgot, say Allah made me forget it, right? But what's interesting is look at this hadith. Okay, and I will share my screen. Is this guy was
a bit? Yeah,
there you go. Aisha reported that the Messenger of Allah listened to the recitation of the Quran by a man in the mosque. Thereupon he said, "May Allah have mercy upon him. He reminded me of verses which I had been made to forget." So that is a self-admission by Muhammad that he would forget the Quranic verses. Okay. And an identical thing happens. And this isn't just a one-off hadith. There's more. As you can see right now, this one's from Bukhari. That one was from Muslim. The Prophet heard a man reciting the Quran in the mosque. He said, "May Allah bestow his mercy upon him as he made me remember such and such a verse which I had missed in such and such surah.
Jeez.
At this point, now what also is very interesting is if you were to write black magic, Muhammad was affected by black magic. I'll find the hadith later, but the hadith goes that he was affected by black magic to the point that he didn't remember if he had intercourse with his wives or not. Okay, so you're telling me that a guy with shaky memory, he's forgetting. Then there's, as if you go to my presentation, you will see there's hundreds of verses gone from the Quran. The idea of nasikh mansukh, verses not being found. Like for example, the verses about breastfeeding 10 times and 5 times, it's no longer found. The verse of stoning, it's no longer found. It doesn't even make sense. If you want to keep the punishment, why take the verse out, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot more.
It's very strange that if you're a Sunni Muslim and you accept hadith, it actually causes you to have problems with the Quran's preservation, because the hadith are actually causing doubt in the Quran's preservation by saying we forgot this verse and he forgot that verse. Of course, a Muslim will say Allah made him forget. This was Allah's will. Allah allowed him to forget. Allah meant it to be removed, which is very strange, right? It always goes back to what's more likely. What are the possibilities? The possibilities are God made him forget, or two, a human being who was making it up and he forgot. Like, which one makes sense?
Exactly, right?
True, right? And then if it's the other one, I mean, you'd need a lot of, I mean, you're just getting to the point now where it's taking more and more in order to keep this worldview together, because you now have to believe in a God that sent multiple versions of this book, and then the versions are all mixed up. Then you have to talk about there's a man that the Quran itself admits that it causes him, his God causes him to forget verses, and then the hadith actually amplifies that and says, well,
did you know, and just to forward that thought, the satanic verses incident, right? Like generally Muslims like, no, it didn't happen. It was very abundantly found in almost all of early Islamic literature, to the point where Hajar Asqalani says that he found 2 Sahih Mursal hadith on the conditions of Bukhari and Muslim that actually verify that incident. But what's interesting, and I will actually just pull this tafsir up for you guys, and what I want you to show, actually, Samir, and can you pull the verse, Surah Hajj, Surah 22, verse 52?
Okay, how do I share my screen? Oh, here it is. Yeah.
Can you read the translation out for me?
Yeah, and we did not send before you any messenger or the prophet except when he spoke, Shaitan threw into it some misunderstanding. Shaitan interjected something, but Allah abolishes what Shaitan throws in. Then Allah makes precise his verses, and Allah is knowing and wise.
Like, what do you even say to that? So God is admitting that, yeah, Satan can influence the prophet. So at this point, you're like, how the hell do we know who was telling what?
This is very, very strange. It's like I've never read this before. Like,
right? But now watch the tafsir that I'm going to show you. And I'm not making this up. This is all done by Muslim scholars, okay? And I'll zoom in for you guys. This is Tafsir al-Jalalain. I'm using this one because it's simpler and it's not too long. I can go into very, very long ones like Tabari, but they're in Arabic and it takes too long. So it goes as by the initial translation, and then it goes into the details. The Prophet, some of the Quraysh, and he actually recounts the whole incident of the satanic verses. Okay. Now, at the end of all of this part of our discussion, what I will come back to is, why did Uthman feel necessary to burn all the manuscripts? What was it that was bugging him that much that warranted such an extreme action that you're just burning the alleged word of God all over the empire? Something was fishy, a big, big, big red flag. I mean, you can go to a mosque and try burning a Quran. Muslims will lose their minds. But Osman's burning. No, it's okay. It's okay. You know, you can say he was trying to preserve the Quran, but the point is, it comes back to human fingerprints everywhere. Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, another part of the Quran that is very interesting is the revelations of convenience. And these are, like I did another stream with you on this called as Islam a Personality Cult.
Mm-hmm.
We went into details. But what I'm trying to get to here is like if you take Surah 33, verse 37, I believe, where Muhammad literally uses God
Oh yes, that's the one. Yeah.
to divorce, to have his adopted son, to marry his adopted son's wife. And prior to that, he abolished adoption so he can marry her. The story surrounding this goes into details. Obviously, Muslims are not going to believe it because, you know, he went to his house and saw her in, let's say, a scandalous attire, got attracted to her, whatnot. What you need to notice is why Allah says, and Allah admits that Muhammad told Zayd something, keep your wife in fear of Allah, but in fact, Muhammad was hiding something, but Allah disclosed it, which was his liking to that girl. Now, keep this in mind. There was a cult leader in the 21st century by the name Wayne Bent, okay? And literally the exact same thing happened. The only difference, the only little difference was that the girl he ended up having sex was not his adopted son's wife, but his actual son's wife. And there's a 2-minute video where he will tell you that he was sitting and then he fell on the ground in a weird prostrating position. And then he felt God tell him to go copulate with the person. It's an identical thing. To the point, like 14 centuries later, this identical thing happens. It's very, very interesting in its own. And in that same surah, if you go, I think it's verse 50, where Muhammad tells us that he is allowed to, he has a special prophetic privilege to marry as many women and as many sex slaves as he wishes. I mean, you just read this. Okay.
We have made lawful to your wives, will you give you the due compensation, and those your right hand possesses.
So the slaves, right there.
The eternity of captives, and the daughters of your paternal uncles, and the daughters of paternal. Okay. And a believing woman, if she gives herself to the prophet, if the prophet wishes to marry her, this is only for you, excluding the other.
Like that line. This is only for you, excluding the other believers. Slam dunk, case closed. Like this is like, come on, dude. But yeah, it's just staggering, you know.
Yeah.
Then I mean, there's in the same surah, and then I think
like it's already like 4 wives plus
how many slaves?
what do you want?
And I mean, if you were to look into it deeper, like he uses Allah to settle his marital disputes quite a bit. Remember the time he got caught with the sex slave on the wrong day? Yes. And then Hafsa and Aisha plotted against him. Yeah, and I mean, Yasir Qadi has a whole episode. He goes into depth with it. And then Muhammad literally says, okay, if you go against Muhammad, Allah will give you double the punishment if you want worldly gains. And this was this other incident where he actually, people thought he divorced all of his wives, where he ended up going to a seclusion for about a month.
Yeah.
Okay. Then there's these other verses like, you don't raise your voice in front of Muhammad. You gotta send him salutation. Sallu alayhi wa sallimu taslima. Don't hang around his house unwarranted because he wants to get things going with his new wife. Versus absolving Aisha of adultery. These are all self-serving, very.
Also, the one where he gave up his wife, his night with Sauda in order to sleep with Aisha because Sauda wasn't attractive, I guess, as much as Aisha.
No, man.
Which seems unfair because you're the prophet. You're supposed to give 1 night to each wife. Already you get 1 out of 9 nights. Now you're going to take away that 1 night that you gave her and give it to another wife? Like, how's that fair? For this almighty example of all mankind, right?
Exactly, right? Actually, this goes perfectly into the next section. I was going to go over morality a little bit. And like, we all know that I'm not claiming objective moral values or something. I have my own axioms and I extrapolate from those, being that human and human flourishment at a personal and societal level, right? You can make injunctions from there too. But just to give you an idea, like, is the morality found in the Quran. In fact, timeless, and also on top of that, worthy of being the ultimate or being championed as the most morally excellent book or moral framework that humanity could ever come up with.
Mhm.
Just that's what I want Muslims to think, is reiterate what you are claiming, because sometimes they do forget. And when you put that in perspective, you realize, okay, so if you all know that if a husband fears misbehavior in 434, you can hit her to discipline her. Now, obviously, you're gonna say beat her lightly, but then like if she didn't listen to you when you were telling her something, she didn't listen to you despite you separating beds from her, then suddenly, like throwing a tissue paper, a miswak will suddenly make her realize that, oh, I was wrong. Okay. And the fact that in the same surah later on, when the nushuz or the disobedience is being pointed out to the women's side, then it's obviously seen as, oh, just reconcile. The woman can't beat the husband, obviously, right? Patriarchy at its best. Now, one thing other, you see that this God had the time to ban alcohol that was rampant in pagan societies. He had the time to ban idolatry, gambling, riba, interest. But what he didn't ban was slavery and sex slavery. In fact, there is no verse in the Quran that puts slavery or sex slavery in a bad light. But on the opposite end, in Surah Mu'minun, it is mentioned as a sign of the believer. الذين لفروجهم حافظون إلا على أزواجهم أو ما ملكت أيمانهم. And it's literally telling you that the believers are those who safeguard their private parts except from their wives and their sex slaves.
Yeah.
Now, one thing,
consent, right? There's no idea of consent even in the Quran.
Yeah, like if you read hadith about the women saying no to sex to her husband, then the angel will curse her till the morning. There's no concept of marital rape either.
Yeah.
What I want to show you right now, and this hadith is absolutely damning.
I've heard some people say that that's not the case, because if that was the case, then she wouldn't be like, there wouldn't be this like angels cursing her, which means she does have the right to deny, but it's considered sinful. So there's a sort of spiritual coercion there, but it might not actually get into like marital rape. But then
it's like, yeah, you have the freedom to choose your religion, but remember, I will burn you like crazy motherfucker. You understand what I mean?
Yeah.
So what now I'm about to show you, and I want anybody who believes in Bukhari or Muslim or Hadith, as a man or a woman, to read these two hadiths together in their right manner. And I'm telling these to these Dawa people as well. Like be the Spanish line of Allah, it'd be Farid or anybody. Okay? Read these hadith, and if you're man enough, come online and defend them. I really want to see that.
I got in a lot of trouble for saying on Twitter that it's not an issue of consent if the parent agrees. That's what he said.
We will get to that too. I have a very beautiful hadith about having sex with prepubescent children. It's not a beautiful hadith, that's the whole law. But Imam Bukhari uses a verse from the Quran to prove it, and uses Muhammad's marriage with Aisha. We will get to that in a second.
Mm-hmm.
The hadith you are seeing on your screen right now is a direct result of what happens when you have moral injunctions from a book like the Quran. You can see that these are the same people that Allah says, I am pleased with them and they are pleased with me. These are the champions of morality. They're in Jannah, apparently, or the blessed companions.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
They literally say, we went out with the messenger of Allah and we received some women. And celibacy, basically being away from their own spouses, was becoming hard. They were basically very, very horny. So they wanted to have sex with the slaves, but they wanted to pull out because they didn't want to get them pregnant. Why? Because if they trade them again, their market value reduces if they're pregnant. Now, the other hadith I will show you.
And I mean, I don't even know if I should bring this up, but ISIS has been doing sex slavery, and they use the same Quran and Sunnah injunctions that existed back then that are not really gone because they're still there. They were never eliminated. And so that's what they do. They buy slaves, they sleep with them, and they sell them. How is it any different than prostitution? Because you can sell her. She's not your wife.
We will actually come to the muta in a little bit, which used to be in the Quran, no longer found.
Oh yeah, I gotta share your screen. Sorry. Okay, yeah.
Okay, so this is the same hadith. That one was in Bukhari. This one is in Muslim. Just read it. We went out with the messenger of Allah on the expedition of Banu Mustalik and took captive some excellent Arab women. Like, these guys were horny, okay? And we desired them, for we were suffering from the absence of our wives. But at the same time, this is literally just insane. We also desired ransom for, so they wanted to sell them after having sex with them. So we decided to have sexual intercourse with them, but by withdrawing the organ. And then they asked Muhammad about it, and he gave them the divine approval.
Yeah.
Just reading this hadith is hard.
It's very strange. How do you justify this? Like,
you cannot tell me that this is consent.
Like, it just doesn't make sense, right? It's just pure and simple, giving his soldiers an incentive to fight his battles, right? Yeah. I mean, there's no other way to put it, and that's why I think a lot of the Quran is emphasized towards men, because these are the ones he had to convince in that society. Like, he didn't really have to convince the women, because he convinced the men, and the women had kind of no choice. You know what I mean? They had the choice, of course, but I mean, if the man converts to Islam, the husband, the wife is, sometimes the wife would convert and the husband wouldn't. But like, when you want to convince these people to go and die for you, you're selling it. You have to sell it to the men, which is why the Quran is kind of leaves you empty-handed if you're a woman, especially in the next life, especially in this life, but even in the next life, like, what does a woman get?
Yeah, exactly.
You get whatever you want. Whatever. It's
very centered around the male ego and the male perception or male sexuality, right? And that's very, very apparent, actually, that you pointed it out. Mm-hmm. To the fact that actually men can have sex slaves and continue to have intercourse with them. Women can't have even sex slaves. Even more unfair. Men can marry 4.
Yeah.
Women only 1. Yeah. And that's one thing also. The reasoning given is like the woman wouldn't know who's the father. But now we have DNA testing, so we can, figure it out. So maybe remove the rule. That's what also shows you that the stagnation of morality in progress that happens if you get stuck with a book that is a time capsule. Mm-hmm. Right? And so what I wanted to go next now is I wanted to show you something. Like, we were talking about muta, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I found.
So muta is temporary marriage. It's
basically Tinder with extra steps.
So basically, you give money to a woman and you say, "I'm going to marry you for the weekend." And this was allowed by Muhammad for a period of time, and then he forbade it, or the companion, the caliphs banned it, basically, right?
So in the verse 424, the normal verse, if you open it on the screen.
You want me to share?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Can you read out the part where it says, though you are allowed to take these in marriage, and those who your right hand possesses?
Also prohibited are all married women except those your right hands possess. That is the decree of Allah upon you. And lawful for you are all others beyond these, provided you seek them in marriage with gifts from your property, desiring chastity, not unlawful sexual intercourse.
Mm-hmm.
So for whatever you enjoy of marriage from them, give them the due compensation as an obligation.
Okay, stop here. Mm-hmm. So now I will show you, if you can see on my screen, there's an extra phrase, not only in Kitab al-Masahif.
What's Kitab al-Masahif again? Is that Abu Dawud's book again?
Yes. Okay. But Tabari mentions this, Ibn Kathir mentions this, Tabrasi mentions this, Shawkani, Baghavi, Kitab al-Masahif already talked about, Mustadrik al-Hakim even gives a Sahih narration on the conditions of Muslim to tell us that indeed this phrase was in the Quran, and it actually makes that verse more understandable and more sensible with the context that was revealed in, if you were to look at the revelation of the verse. And I will show you if anybody's interested, I can show you that Tabari saying, إلى أجل مسمى. They're in Arabic, but like you can see that what they're saying. I will leave a link to the post actually in the description.
Okay. Yeah.
We don't want to get too sidetracked into the muta discussion. Okay. What else? Oh yeah, I wanted to show something. So remember that you've heard of people telling you that Muhammad said that women are deficient in intellect, and that there's a verse in the Quran that says that women, their testimony is half.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm just going to share a few tafsirs of that hadith by the greatest mufassir of them all, Muhammad himself. Let's see what Muhammad himself has to say. I mean, who else could know, right? He has to know. And this is in, this one's from Tirmidhi, but this is very, very, very common hadith. But if you notice,
I have one from Bukhari on my screen. It's /6/9 Bukhari.
Okay, so here he uses their testimony being half of a man as a deficiency in their intellect. And you found one too, right?
Yeah.
You compared that one too.
Yeah, both of them. I mean, like you said, this is common in many of the books.
Many, it's a mutawatir hadith.
Yeah, he says, you curse frequently and are ungrateful to your husbands. I have not seen anyone more deficient in intellect and religion than you. A cautious, sensible man could be led astray by some of you. And then he asked, what's the deficiency in the intellect and religion? He said, is not the evidence of two women equal to the witness of one man? They said, yes. He said, is not that's a deficiency in her intelligence? Isn't it true that a woman cannot pray or fast during her menses? Women said, yes. He said, that is a deficiency in her religion.
I mean, at this point, I'll leave that hadith there by its own. It's very self-explanatory what he was implying. I also wanted to get to the whole idea, like we now live in times where women have a lot more rights and a lot more freedom. And one of the interesting things is how do women, especially Muslim women, square the idea of something like the hijab with feminist ideas, right? Like the Quran is very explicit in why it sent the hijab. And in Surah Ahzab, let me find that verse for you, where it says that do not make showing like the showing of the times of the ancient. Oh, there you go. So in 33:33, it says, and abide in your houses and do not display yourselves as was the display of the former times. And even if it's addressed some of these verses towards the wives of the Prophet, the wives of the Prophets are by default the best role model for Muslim women. So that in itself follows. And then what's interesting is in 33:59, that same surah, I love chapter 33. It's the most bizarre chapters in my opinion. It says, tell your wives and your daughters and the women of the believers to bring down over themselves of their outer garment.
Just 33. What's the ayah number?
59.
Okay.
And it's basically telling you the purpose of hijab.
Oh yeah,
it's to protect women from being molested or abused. Okay. So clear. Now also, if you don't do the hijab and if you don't follow the commands, then guess what happens? You are sinning and you are liable to go to hell. Again, comes back to the idea of is this really free will? That's another topic on its own, like the hadith surrounding that. Okay, now the other idea was like, Muhammad also used the same chapter again, that his wives can never remarry anybody after he's dead. So imagine that 18-year-old Aisha couldn't ever remarry, right? And to marry his adopted son's wife, he had to abolish adoption together, and that creates a very, very weird dynamic where, for example, if a Muslim family adopts a boy and then they ended up getting an actual blood offspring that is a girl, when they grow up they're not mahram, so they can't be together, and these weird
and the mom and the son,
yes,
the daughter.
I don't know if you remember the hadith where Muhammad sent this kid to go suckle on this old woman's breast so he won't have any desires for her.
That was very strange hadith.
Yeah. Okay, so now we're done. What the point is that the Quran itself is not any book that's worthy of any moral consideration or being championed as the best book on reality. It's no.
Even without the hadith, like a lot of these things are implied in the Quran. For example, the whole thing about you cannot marry your foster sister, who is your sister from breastfeeding. That Quran, it doesn't say anything about number of suckling, stuff like that, but a lot of this stuff does come from the Quran as well.
Yeah.
And what do you say to people that don't accept hadith, or they say this is a weak hadith, or like, how are you using this to disprove the Quran when it might not be true? Like, it might not be historically accurate. What do you say to that?
Again, like the thing is, you have to have a starting basis somewhere, right? Like if you take the Quran just by its own, the book is rendered incomprehensible more than half of it. Like then you're just left with a mishmash of gibberish with a few verses you can understand. If you don't take the hadith seriously, well, then how do you pray? How do you go to Hajj and perform all the detailed rituals?
Yeah.
How many prayers do you even pray at all? Like, is it 5? Is it 3? In fact, the words that was there was Salatul Asr was a word in there, and it's not missing any. It's not even there anymore. And there's hadith about that too.
Yeah, you end up with Quranism is a completely different religion that nobody must follows in the world.
Yeah.
It's a very niche belief, eh?
At the same time, like with the hadith and them being collected ages and ages, like hundreds of years after Muhammad, I tend to side with the hadith that are more mutawatir or more abundantly reported because they have a higher chance of actually being true versus these one-off reports about some by one sahabi. I mean, I won't trust them as much. And obviously you have to realize, like, for example, there's a lot of mythology in the hadith because you have to realize that these hadith were formulated or compiled in an era of complete scientific illiteracy and an age of superstition, that too about 150 to 200 years after the passing of Muhammad, who's a prophet, holy figure. Now go figure if there wasn't mythology. And one of the evidences to this is in the Quran, you will see that whenever the Meccans ask Muhammad for a miracle, the Quran always makes an excuse. They're like, oh, even if you send an angel, you won't believe. And if the sky fell, you won't believe. You guys are just not going to believe.
Yeah.
But then in the hadith, it's just Muhammad is performing miracles like it's no tomorrow, like snap of a finger miracle, you know? Like, splitting the moon and whatnot.
Oh, yeah, we didn't talk about those yet. Let's talk about those.
Well, what is to say about the splitting of the moon, right? Like it's
even no, not that. Like you wanted to go to the examples of talking trees and stuff like that.
Yes. So what I was actually the next part I was going to go to, and a bunch of people, and this is a constant point that Muslims bring up. It's about the plagiarism. Okay.
Yeah.
Muslims want to, and they're completely driven by their bias of projecting Muhammad as an isolated, illiterate man whose only source of information about these stories from the Bible or the Torah or surrounding areas or any mythology stories was only and only God. And they'd be like, oh, he couldn't read, he couldn't write, he had no idea. How would he have known? And recently, this Farid also made this same point. And he was saying like, oh, the Gospels were translated ages ago. But like, dude, you have to read your own books. And I'm going to show you something. And I'll tell you that Muhammad was reading the Gospel in Arabic before he himself believed him to be a prophet. Okay? And how? Remember Warqa bin Nawfal?
Yep.
The cousin of
Khadija, right?
Yes. Now I'm going to show you a few hadith. Okay. Look at this one. What does it say? Okay. Prophet came back. What did Warqa used to do? He used to read the Gospels in Arabic. Oh, so the Gospel was available to people around Muhammad, his family members, in fact, in Arabic. So he did get exposed to it. Let's go to another hadith. This one's a little longer, so I'll find you the relevant part. Khadija then took him to Warqa, son of Khadija's paternal. Warqa had been converted to Christianity in the pre-Islamic period and used to write the Gospel in Arabic as much as Allah had wished him to write. He was literally translating it in Arabic. What gets worse? Farid, you listening? It's another hadith, and it's the same. It's the same. He's an old man, lost his eyesight, and He will go.
He tried to kill himself.
Oh, it's a little further up. Oh, there it is.
Ah,
He
did
used to write the Arabic Gospels in Arabic. And like I said, Bukhari, Muslim. Case closed. Okay. Now, another point, and this is what I don't get it, is intellectual laziness. Okay. Not only are they not reading their own books, they then claim that Mecca was this trade center. Mecca wasn't a major trade route. It was the pilgrimage center. Well, if it's the center of pilgrimage and trade center, a lot of foreigners most probably frequent the place, and they come from different places with different stories and religions. So there's a high possibility of Muhammad hearing these stories from these pilgrims or traders. Another thing, you
like,
are telling
it's so obvious. Like you,
exactly.
like, come on. He didn't talk to anybody. He didn't talk to any Jews or any Christians in the world. Like, really? This was
Exactly.
a society where people, that's how they communicated, through stories and to like memorizing things and passing it on.
And what's staggering is they also claim that Muhammad was a merchant going to nearby places. Obviously, he's interacting with different cultures and stories. Like, come on. Then they claim that in Medina, Jews were living for centuries with these big settlements, and in Khaybar too. And then Medina is also on a major trade route that the Quraysh used to frequent. So if you keep saying that Muhammad got no exposure to these competing ideologies and religions, you are just lying and being lazy, and you're just following your bias to project Muhammad as an isolated man so that you can somehow formulate the argument that the only source of his knowledge was Gabriel or Allah. Again, false. Now, what I wanted to get to, and I mean, we have a bunch of examples, like the Alexander Romance, the Seven Sleepers. These are things that cripple into the Quran.
The Syriac infancy gospel. So the point is, and this actually was a big problem when I found this out, was that every single story in the Quran that we have found has references to similar stories from that era in the language. So either in Arabic or Syriac that were in close area, like close proximity and time to the Quran. So is that a coincidence? And some of these stories are known to be fabrications. For example, the infancy gospel, it was made as a sort of religious move, like a religious political move, in order to kind of push back Jesus's deification earlier, right? So he spoke as a baby, whereas in traditional, I mean, now what we know of as Christianity, the Orthodox Christianity, they don't accept that story of Jesus speaking as a baby. They consider it like a sort of a fake gospel. They don't consider it to be like a reliable source. But to Muhammad, at his time where he lived, he's like, oh, Jesus spoke as a baby. Everybody knows that. Like that's the story I heard, right? He didn't realize that.
And his wife's cousin was translating the gospel. Maybe it was that one.
like we do find a lot of heretical beliefs that, like, for example, Uzair in the Quran, it says he's the son of God. The Jews say Ezra is the son of Allah. Like, no Jew ever said that
Where he gets the Trinity wrong completely.
Yeah, right? Like Mary is part of the Trinity. Like, these things were probably what Muhammad knew
himself believed.
Yeah, because there's no mention of the Pope in the Quran. Like, did he not know that the biggest sect of Christianity there's nothing about a Pope in the Quran? He had no clue, apparently.
Yeah, exactly, right? Now, the other point, since we were talking about plagiarism, we want to go into the mythology part of it. Now, there are some absolutely outlandish, bizarre stories in this book, and I don't even know where to begin. Take the biggest chapter of the Quran, Surah Baqarah. Okay, why is that chapter called Surah Baqarah, the chapter of the cow? Because it has a very interesting story in it. So in the time of Moses, this occurs from, I think, verses 68 to 73. Time of Moses, this guy gets killed. Nobody knows who killed him. So Allah tells them to go find a yellow cow and then slaughter it. And then they slaughter it. And then he says, take this piece of steak, this dead cow meat, and throw it on the dead body. And as soon as you threw it on the dead body comes back to life and tells who murdered it. And that's it. It dies again. Yeah, that's what I thought when I first actually internalized what the fuck happened there.
Connected to that same story, Allah said,
In the Bible.
and in the Bible too, you should all kill each other. Kill
That
yourself.
one. Yeah,
Yeah,
for
kill yourself.
forgiveness.
That was, as a Muslim, I was like, what? Like, that's crazy. Like, you all have to kill each other because you worship a calf? I was like so confused. Like, that's the punishment
Oh,
for.
man.
Okay.
So one of the things I really, really enjoy is the shooting stars chasing genies. I mean, just saying that makes me laugh. Like, it's in Surah Safat, Surah Mulk, verse 5, Surah Jinn, I think verses in the 8 or 9 as well. It's very, very clear. وَجَعَلْنَاهَا وَلَقَدْ زَيَّنَّا السَّمَاءَ الدُّنْيَا بِمَصَابِيهَا وَجَعَلْنَاهَا رُجُومًا لِلشَّيَاطِينَ, that we have adorned the narrow sky with stars, and we've made the stars as stones or flames pelted at spying genies. And the hadiths go pretty deep into it and explain how and when this happened, where the whole idea is that there were these heavenly meetings going on with the angels, but then the genies would kind of sneak up on them and kind of eavesdrop on some of the conversations, and then the angels would realize, oh no, and then they'd throw like a shooting star as a missile chasing the genie to scare it off, right? And it's very well documented in the Quran, and it just shows that these are just very expected human understandings of the time being propagated as divine nonsense.
Yeah.
And what is needed to be understood, and what these people now end up doing, is a lot of Muslims, first they used to do what we call push the scientific miracles in the Quran narrative. Then they realized it could backfire, so they retracted that. And then they started separating the Quran from science, saying that, oh, it's not a book of science. It's not a book of science. Computers. Nobody's saying it's a book of science.
Exactly.
Science is a tool, or science is a framework that makes claims about reality. Your book is also making claims about reality. If your book says virgin births are possible and science says no, they're both claims about biology, okay? So the whole separation doesn't make sense, okay? And the thing is that these understandings of these ideas was propagated as fact by the Prophet. And the thing was, like, for example, another very weird verse is Surah Hud, verse 7, I believe. And it says that before Allah created the universe, so think about this. Before Allah created the universe, his throne was floating above the water. How did water exist before atoms and all these things were created? I mean, if you want to say kun fayakun, yeah, for sure, all God can do what he wants, but it's just bizarre. And what's also interesting is the water creation myth. It's borrowing from a lot of previous cultures and ideas. And I will let you read that verse while I look at the next point.
Is he who created the heavens and earth in 6 days, and his throne had been upon water. This used to confuse me as well, and I didn't understand, coming from modern scientific worldview, what's going on there. And that's when I studied ancient religions. At least I watched a YouTube video, and this guy actually made a very interesting observation that this idea of an eternal ocean, or like the water being like, eternal, was common to a lot of ancient people, because they used to look out at the ocean and they used to see it going on forever, and they thought, well, the ocean's not going anywhere. So maybe the ocean was there, and maybe the water was always there. So that's where this kind of myth comes from, of like God's.
And it ties into a lot of other mythological beliefs, like the Aboriginal people in Canada. Some of them believe that the Earth is being carried on the back of a turtle, and in the Muslim version, kinda is the back of the whale.
Yeah,
if you read Tafsir of Ibn Kathir,
yeah,
right?
That's in some tafsir books, right?
Yeah. So it's Tafsir of Surah Qalam, or Surah Noon, whatever you want to call it. And the whale's name comes from when the other prophet was swallowed by the whale for 3 days. So the Noon was the name of the whale.
Yeah. I was going to say that this all comes back to what this is something that actually was mentioned as a criticism to one of my latest videos, which is, why are you picking on tangential issues? For example, you couldn't find the gate of Dhul Qarnayn. And I want to make this point because it's a very, very important point, that it comes down to falsifiability. If something is not falsifiable, that means that it cannot be disproved. It doesn't mean it's false. False is not the same as falsifiable. For a statement to have a truth value, a valuable statement, it has to be falsifiable. It has to be something that you can disprove, not necessarily disprove, but you can disprove. It's not impossible. For example, there is a God. That statement is not falsifiable. There's no way to prove or disprove there's a God, a general deity God. But if you say, well, God made a hole in my shoes, well, now that's something that we can look at. We can say that God said, like whenever the Quran interacts with humanity and makes a statement, for example, God created the heavens and earth in 7 days, or everything was on water, or the heavens and earth was split, or there's a gate that was made between two mountains. Well, that's something that's falsifiable.
Yeah.
We find this gate. Does this interaction with humanity, the orbits of the sun and moon, these are things that it's not a book of science, but it's describing things that can be falsifiable, which is where you get into the problems in the Quran. So the Quran may not intend to be describing science for people to understand. It's just describing as it was known, but it shows a flaw, right? Indirectly, because unintentionally too. And then, this is something I want to talk about later as well in one of my next videos I'm planning to do. How long was that inaccurate scientific worldview? It was for a very short time, and then humans within the last, starting from like a couple hundred years after Muhammad's death, started to understand it's not a geocentric, like the sun is not the center of the galaxy, right? They started to understand, sorry, the earth, I mean, we go around the sun. And so we have a long tail now of humanity's discoveries forever and ever that the Quran's wrong. It seems wrong. It seems outdated. So why would God do that? Just to
Exactly.
100 years of idiocy and ignorance and backwardness and superstition? Why would you prefer that for the rest of the existence until the Day of Judgment?
Speaking of the point of geocentrism and the Earth and the Sun revolving around the Earth, if you actually look, big scholars from this century, Sheikh Salih al-Fawzan, and I think it's Shinkithi too, they wrote it in their books, and clearly that no, the sun goes around the Earth. And they use the evidence, the hadith, that it goes under, does the sajda, comes back up, and all that as evidence, and to show the geocentric view. But we know it's false. And the fact, what I wanted to do is the controversial verse about the sun setting in the pond.
Yeah.
The first 400 years of Islamic tafsir it's taken as literally, to the fact that Muhammad said it was literal. And I want to show you this one, because there's hadith where he actually affirms that it actually goes into the pond. So this is just showing that in Surah Ghasiya, وَإِلَى الْأَرْضِ كَيْفَ سُطِحَتْ, that Jalalain admits that most people believe the earth is indeed flat, but you can hold the other beliefs. But normally the most easily understood or the derived understanding is the world is flat from the Quran. What we get into next is the hadith in Sahih al-Jami. So it's a book collection of Sahih hadith, and it says, Muhammad asks, هل تدرون أين تغرب حازي, about the sun, تغرب في عين حامية, and this is Sahih, okay, that it in Abi Dawud, that it indeed sets in a pond of murky water. Then in Abu Dawud you can see this one, فإنها تغرب في عين حامية, that this one is a little different worded, but it is also Sahih in its chain. Then in Silsila Hadith Sahiha, they have a whole longer version that incorporates that hadith and the sun going underneath and doing the sajda and coming out and asking God to permission to rise again and stuff. And this is by Sheikh Al-Ambani, and he classifies it as sahih. And here's the words again, فَإِنَّهَا تَغْرُبُ عَيْنٍ حَامِيَةٍ. It doesn't surprise me that the Quran says all that, because it's expected. It's a book written in the 7th century, and it's echoing the understanding of the time. Now, what I'm trying to get to, and you can keep sharing these absurd stories from the Quran that either contradict science or just blatant, bizarre, and absurd. And the point now I'm going to make is very important, because many, many, many Muslims fall into this trap and they don't even realize it, okay? If you take these stories and reduce them to mere metaphors, You are doing exactly what the kuffar, the Quraysh of Mecca did. The Quran documents it and refutes them. When they heard these stories from Muhammad, what did they say? Haza asatirul awwalin. These are just merely fables of the ancient. As soon as you say that these aren't factual accounts and these are merely stories for metaphorical purposes, you are in the same camp as those Meccans. And Allah refutes them, نَحْنُ نَقُصُّ عَلَيْكَ نَبَأَهُم بِالْحَقِّ, that we have indeed told you their story in truth. Very, very important point. Okay.
I want to say one thing, sorry, about the
Go ahead.
miracles. Even if we, sorry, I should have said this earlier. When we talked about the virgin births and stuff like that, like even if you want to, grant that those exceptions can happen, still there's many other statements in the Quran that can be easily proved false, right? You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Now, this is the second last section, and then the last section is going to be probably very shocking for a lot of people who have never come across that idea. But before that, we were going to go into the hate found in the Quran. And it's staggering where if I were to ask you to imagine a book written in the 21st century by an atheist that calls all the Muslims dogs, cattle, donkey, monkeys, animals, fell to worst of creation, what would happen? There'd be Islamophobia, bigotry, banned,
And rightfully so, right? If you're
and rightfully so.
you shouldn't do that.
Allah does the same thing.
Yeah.
Okay. He calls unbelievers as dogs, as worse than cattle, as compares them monkeys, donkeys, even pigs. Some of them you turn into pigs for eating shrimp on a certain day or fishing. Calls them animals, calls them najis, calls them sharrul bariyya, or the worst and worst of all of creation. The fact that this much hatred is coming from a merciful God, and then he wants to psychopathically torture people, like the description in the Quran about the torture is just ridiculous. Like you have hooks, you have boiling oil being poured over people, their bowels are scalding, they're being made to drink this boiling water like thirsty camels. They're made to eat this thorny plant that'll burn and cheer their insides. They're being put on iron hooks, and as soon as they burn, their skins are replaced so they can continue feeling the pain. Like, what kind of psychopathic God is this?
Yeah.
Like, come on, dude. And these all reflect these a lot of the things that you notice in the Quran, what God, the traits of God, are divine attributes. As a neuroscience student, I see them as projections of the human mind upon God.
Yeah.
God does not have the biological mechanisms or cannot have philosophically, otherwise he'd become a contingent to experience like love and fear and all these kind of emotions. These are very, very human emotions. Okay, and they have an underlying biology and hormones and stuff, right? What is God PMSing? Maybe those words. You can say a bunch of things, but the point being is the hate found in the Quran and the bigotry found in the Quran is completely unwarranted and makes no sense coming from an all-knowing, all-powerful being who could, instead of replying to people with threats when he's asked for his evidence or an argument, he just keeps saying, oh, you don't like me? You'll burn in hell. Oh, I'll do this to you when you die. Give a rational argument. That's what you see a constant theme in the Quran. Now, like the whole versus the anti-Semitism is crazy. I mean, in one place you're saying in 256 that, oh, freedom of religion, blah, blah, blah. And then in the later surahs, Nasikh Mansukh, this word of the verse of the sword. And then 929 is one of the last verses. Many tafsirs say that it cancels out all the peaceful verses before it. Is that, fight the Ahlul Kitab till they submit to you willingly or till they pay the jizya and humiliation and whatnot, and it goes on and on against them. Don't take Jews and Christians as friends; they're just your enemies.
Yeah, and I asked someone once. I mean, like, it's just a simple question. Like, would you have your child if you knew that child would go to hell? Would you still have your child? No, I wouldn't. Nobody would. Like, you'd be crazy if you had a kid knowing that kid would go to hell. So if you would stop that child from growing up and going to hell, that makes you better than God, because you wouldn't let someone else go through that, yet God is letting all these people, like, not really, we don't believe there's actually God doing that, but you are claiming that this God is actually creating all of these souls intentionally, knowing that billions of them are going to go to hell.
Yeah.
Right?
Actually, when you do get into the literature, the Islamic concept of free will, especially in the Hadith, is very crooked. Where there's Hadith saying that God creates people for hell and heaven before when they're in the loins of their fathers, before their birth. He already knows where they're going. And there's Hadith that literally explicitly state that there's Hadith that you were made for hell. There was no question about it. So God just created to torture you.
Yeah.
There are Hadith that say prepubescent kids can go to hell. Makes no sense.
Oh, they'll be
Okay?
tested, right? Isn't it? They'll be tested or something.
No. It literally says that there was a kid that died, and Aisha's like, "Oh, are
Oh.
you gonna pray the funeral?" He's like, "No, he might end up in hell." And Aisha's like, "What?" And then the Sahabas were asking. Actually, the Sahabas then asked, "Well, what's the point of doing all the good deeds?" So Muhammad then replies, "Oh, Allah will facilitate you to do the deeds that will lead you
Yeah.
to your end destination." So the whole exercise is futile. And I said, like, I posted these hadith and I can show you, but right now we have to get through a bunch of things. Now, one of the last things I wanted to get to, and I also will give a sneak peek preview. Why is the Quran like this, and what was Muhammad experiencing when he was getting the revelation? Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to screen share you a sneak peek of what I've been working on for a while. And it's a presentation, and like I'll go through what parts of the brain, very, very generalized, for very simplified. We will go through different types of seizures. People think this is the only type of seizure, tonic-clonic, but there's a bunch of different types. And Muhammad actually had remarkable, like, to the point where I think this is the most tenable and the best explanation that fits the evidence provided, that what was wrong with him. Now, what I wanted to show you was when he was before prophethood, he could actually talk to stones and heard trees and stones talk to him. If you can hear this if you can see this is from Sahih Muslim. I recognize a stone in Mecca. They used to pay me salutation before my advent as a prophet, and I recognize that even now. And the similar thing. Like I said, we'll get into the temporal lobe epilepsy thing and how that part of the brain region is also responsible for distinction between objects and inanimate objects, and how facial recognition, if there's a problem there, you could actually end up having the same hallucination. But what I really wanted to get into was the first revelation a little bit. Now, this guy, if you can see this, I'll zoom in for you guys a little bit. Okay, so instead of going into too much detail, I'll just read the second one.
The relevant part, yeah.
Yeah. So Gabriel took hold of him and choked him hard, then released him and said, "Read." At the same happened as before. Then Gabriel seated him upon a soft rug. Yada, yada, yada. Precious stones. Okay. Guy's having a good hallucination there. and then he left. And then was overcome by anxiety and asked himself.
Being isolated and alone and in the dark, sensory deprivation can cause hallucination.
Oh, yeah. That's why solitary confinement is used as a form of punishment, right? We're social creatures. Although sometimes, like, some people do that voluntarily, but still it's not a great thing to do. So one thing you notice here is he's having a shortness of breath. Now, this is very common when seizures begin. They go upwards into this from the abdominal sternum, and the diaphragm constricts, so he can't really breathe. He feels like he's hallucinating, so he's being pressed. Okay. Now, what I wanted to go to is he was actually passed out in an Ibn Ishaq version, and he woke up, and these words were written on his heart, and his own. Now, Muhammad's own initial idea was that he's either becoming a mad poet, like the Meccans saw and mentioned that in the Quran as well, or he's possessed by a genie. And he went up to the top of a mountain, and then he was about to kill himself. And he looked up into heaven and saw Gabriel. This guy was suicidal, straight up. This is classic schizophrenia happening in front of you right now. Looked at him before, and neither advancing nor turning back. It's an absent seizure. And this guy just keeps staring. This guy's friends look around. He's spaced out. Psychogenic seizures as well, probably. And then, like, let's go to some other one. This one's better. So when the revelation started, he would have these auras of bright light. In this, when he was running to his wife, you notice there's something called myoclonic seizures, where there's fasciolations or twitching in muscles. You see Muhammad has that happen to with his neck muscles twitching. Okay. His neck muscles twitching with terror till he entered upon Khadija. Now, also the amygdala is very hypersensitized during that time, in seizures as well. So you have an in psychosis, you have an intense form of fear mostly, and that's where you can see anxiety and fear. Okay, let's see what is next. So this guy would go in a cave, hang around by himself. And what he's trying to say was, like, one day he came out and he heard a voice. Somebody called him, and he looked about everywhere. He couldn't see anybody. Called again, and as soon as he looks up, there's this big angel covering the whole horizon, sitting there, right? And and he begins to tremble because he's that scared. Because yeah, it's a scary hallucination. And the funny thing is that the hallucination of the angel is happening right now in the form of a man, and which is, when we go into the detailed presentation, we'll talk about this as well. This is pretty interesting. Muhammad saw a green screen covering the horizon. I don't even know what to make of this. Okay. But the next section we're about to go into is the general condition of the Prophet. Now, this is where it gets really weird. If you're a Muslim and you've never heard these before, take a deep breath, because it might be a little difficult to digest. This thing is slam dunk, case closed epilepsy here. Ringing bells or auras are one of the most common auras before seizure. And there's different types of seizures, like I said. But this one, if you were to present this as a symptom to an actual clinicist, they will, and with all the other things combined, this is a slam dunk. The ringing of the bell, it's slam dunk. Okay. What you're getting into is very, very specific. What happens when some people have what ends up happening is the seizure starts in temporal lobe, can spread to your precentral gyrus, and then you can have uncontrolled muscle movements, and it's synchronous firing. So you have jittery teeth, lip smacking. What does this say? Let's read. So the Quran actually even has the verse that says that Muhammad used to move his tongue really fast, lip smacking. And it says that Ibn Abbas was doing that. And then he goes and mentions the verse about it. Okay. Now, this other hadith on the side goes into more detail and said that it literally would sound like the drone of bees before his face. His teeth are going to, he's literally jittering with teeth, so the sound is a nest of bees in his face. Don't believe me? Look at this one from Sahih Muslim. In this one, when Muhammad is getting a revelation, he's literally snorting like a baby camel. If that's not enough, then there's a version of exactly this hadith, but in that one it says it's a baby calf, but that's in Ibn Kathir. Okay, I think it's Ibn Kathir's Sirah here.
Baby calf? What is this?
Like, he would either snort like a baby camel or like a baby cow when receiving revelation. I mean, it's like, what the hell is, like, when you read this, it's ridiculous. Then you have these also, like, when
it says that is the hardest upon me.
Yes, that's what I'm trying to say. Why is
it so painful? Right? Like,
well, it's because, like, when epilepsy is basically too much synchronicity in your brain. So when you have that, there's an influx of just huge spikes in synchronous firing of neurons, and your auditory part of the brain is next to your temporal lobe. So it's very normal for people to have these auras or these ringing bell sounds come up to them. Like, I'm not going to get into too many details, because then it just gets becomes more of a neuroscience lecture. But what I want you to notice here is when he would have his seizure sometimes, or when he's getting the revelation, his forehead would be flooded with sweat. And I mean, the other one, the white screenshot here, if you see, he says that he was bathed in perspiration, like he was sweating like crazy. Now, another thing is that until revelation, he underwent the agony that used to seize him
Even sees him.
with sweat emerging like pearls from him, even though it was a winter's day. You know, obviously the Muslims didn't realize, and the point what I'm trying to make is that Muslim scholars and the Sahaba preserved these episodes of Muhammad getting the revelation as the heaviness of the revelation, but unknowingly they preserved precise, perfect symptoms of epilepsy, which you even see now in patients. Okay,
Like
like they sometimes have this insanely identical hallucinations.
the sweating as well.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Wow.
Now if you notice here, like he'll have heavy breathing. The color of his face would change. This is in Sahih Muslim, and oops. And then this one is in the one over here is again Siratul Nabawiyah from Ibn Qasir, and he says that the Messenger of God would become in pain, that his face would look very serious, and his eyes would close. So he's definitely, you know, something's up. All right, let's see what this one is. This one says the guy poked his head underneath and he heard the Prophet having very, very heavy breathing. And I think this is the variant of this hadith that says that the narrator thought he was snorting like a camel as well. Okay, so yeah, this one says that he was snorting like a baby calf, would have a very pale body and face. The absence is him not being aware of people sometimes around him or just losing all sense of attention. That's an absent seizure. There are literally, I'll tell you, there are seizures that can happen and the person will be sitting right next to you and you'd never know he had a seizure. He'll just appear spaced out. And unless you know that he has this condition, you would never be able to tell. Now, what I'm trying to tell you is the headaches. Look at this. Like he would get headaches. It's hilarious.
Wow.
Okay, let me just fix. Why is this doing that? Okay. All right. So one thing was that he would feel as if his soul is being seized by it, as if he's dying. You know, and the headaches. I mean, right? And then they'd put henna leaves on top of him. Again, these are all more like this one is very interesting. It's from Tabari Volume 8, and the way he ended up marrying Zainab. If you look at it, now this is insane that if you were to watch the video of Wayne Bent and how he got the revelation and how he explains it that he fell on the ground and he felt like God was talking to him. And then as soon as he got up, he knew that what was about to happen and he literally did exactly the same. And then this is the story where Muhammad faints right before receiving the revelation to go marry his adopted son's wife. Ironic, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But like I said,
yeah, it says that when the messenger of God was talking with Aisha, a
Mhm.
fainting overcame him. Wow. And then he woke up and said, I'm marrying Zainab. That was wow. And you know, it's interesting that people that have these episodes, sometimes they want to keep having it. Like even today.
Oh, yes.
They're like, it's so powerful and profound, this like brain thing that's happening in the brain.
People that have had seizures, sometimes they're in such a state of bliss that they want to go back to it. They feel like they're one with the universe, talking to God.
Yeah.
The fact that they see the same kind of hallucination with people in white dressed up and coming to them. And what's fascinating was one of Muhammad's first hallucinations as a kid when he was thrown on the ground by these two people dressed in a white came, cut his heart open in the middle of the desert, washed his heart in a bowl of Zamzam. And he had the identical hallucination before his Miraj thing as well. In Ibn Ishaq's version of it, what they say is he felt like they were playing in his abdomen and slowly went up to his chest area. When seizures start or there's a seizure upcoming, the aura starts normally, and most commonly is a rising sensation in the abdomen that goes into the sternum again. So again, there's so much more detail I will go into when I come up the final version of the presentation. Just one thing I wanted to show you was, why is the Quran like the way it is? So one of the things we call is hypergraphy, and this is a manifestation or form of writing or expression or literary expression seen in people with schizophrenia or compulsive rhyming disorders or epilepsy. And a lot of the times, and you have clinical cases, and I'll find the paper for you guys, is you can end up having compulsive rhyming in your head because you were epileptic. Okay.
And this is significant because the Quran is an example of disjointed speech, of repeated rhymes,
Exactly.
patterns. And I was reading a book about stories, and it's fascinating that something like 80% of poets have mental illness. And
Oh, yeah, and this is something I'll tell you.
And kill themselves too.
I will tell you what it is. So something what you notice in creative people is synesthesia. So when you're young and you're a kid, your brain has these neural connections, but it's too many of them. And there are overlaps in regions. So sometimes what happens is, and you will have heard this before, as people sometimes will, let's say, see the color red and then taste pepper on their tongue. Okay, or they will think of the number 5 and a green color will flash in front of them.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So babies go through this a lot. And this has been shown with statistical significance, that people who are more creative, poets, writers, authors, artists, are known to have synesthesia way more prevalent in them. Yeah. I know. So there's a friend of mine, I've met this person, and he's diagnosed schizophrenic. I'm not going to name him for confidentiality purposes, but I've talked to him as well. He's got, like I said, the first problem, people think that these people are dysfunctional people, throbbing, foaming at the mouth, having seizures all the time. No, it's not that. They can function. This guy has a degree in journalism and whatnot. And during like what I was talking about, the hypergraphia, he was telling me that when he has sometimes his episodes, he starts writing words in poetry automatically. And when I was reading his poetry, the insane, or his work and other samples, what you see is the jumping of topics, the obsessiveness, the repetition, the threatening insecurities pop up as soon as somebody's criticized, the psychopathic tendencies of like the torture descriptions, right? These are many things. Now, what I'm going to show you is a paper on PubMed, as like I said, hypergraphia, many patients with right temporal lobe seizures. Okay, you can read all of this. We will put this there, and it's not just one. This is one. I will show you another one. There are a bunch of these. You can look it up. This one's actually good. I'll actually have the PubMed as well for this one. Yep, there it is. I did find this paper full text. There you go. So like I said, this paper as well, hypergraphy of poetry in an epileptic patient. Like I said, very common use to it. It's very well understood.
And I want to just jump in and say that a Muslim neuroscience student by the name of Mohammed Ghailan, who is quite well known, has a video where I actually uploaded it as well, a clip of it, where he says, in my lab. Well, first of all, he says, my lab is full of atheists.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, like, I mean, with neuroscience, there's very little religion.
And then, because anyway, I won't get into that. And then he says, we can explain prophethood using what we know, like, perfectly. So we'll get into that. So what's going to be the topic? Let's end on this. What's going to be, unless there's one more thing you want to mention before we conclude.
Well, I was
asking about this presentation, when it's going to be. Sounds
it's
like
about 60% done.
Yeah.
So I'll be a little bit, like maybe a couple more weeks.
Okay.
But what I wanted to point to you guys before we end this part of the topic was there was a thing. So one of the parts of the brain that's essentially linked to feelings of religiosity, or is the temporoparietal complex. So the temporal and parietal lobes. And in the 90s, I believe, like neuroscientists were able to stimulate those parts of the brain, and they created what they call a God helmet. So they can put that helmet on people's head. And even atheists, when they were stimulated, sometimes they would feel like God is in the room with them, or sometimes they will hallucinate. Some people will see God, some people will hear him. And it's like you're showing what happens. And you can look at Dr. Vivius Ramachandran's research on it. It's
Yeah.
phenomenal. Uh,
And this happens even with like certain drugs, like shrooms.
oh, yes.
Intense, meaningful. I haven't tried it. One day, hopefully. Meaningful experience of being connected to the universe. And
Mhm.
like some people said it, like they felt God and they don't believe in God. It's quite interesting, right?
Yeah, and I mean, like, these are things you can take ketamine and you can dissociate the DMN, like there are networks in the brain that if you shut off them, like you can completely cut out the sense of self, and the subject-object perception drops out, and you feel very, very one with the universe. So at the end of all of this, what I want you to do, what my point is the confidence of Muslims propagating the Quran as this amazing piece of literature that can never be matched in its eloquence, its style, its content, its philosophical, and it's being cherished as the highest form of literary expression possible, and that it's the epitome of theological, philosophical, and moral morality. Is, after watching this presentation, that point is completely unsustainable. It is absolutely ludicrous at a point at certain times that if you were to watch this presentation, just with all the flaws in that book, that the only conclusion you could reach that this is God's word, there's something, you need to be intellectually more thorough. This, to me, the reason why I did this live stream is I see a lot of Muslims not realize that the Quran is actually an amazing piece of evidence against Islam if studied correctly. Okay, and also a lot of Muslims, they say this thing, and this was in amongst the discourse of a few recent people, and they were saying that they believe in prior truths, or they believe in the Quran due to certain extra whatever evidence is. Henceforth, whatever is in the Quran is by default true. And the whole point was to show that your prior evidence, or your baseline starting position, is so flawed. Your book is so fundamentally flawed in so many ways that you don't really have any footing to stand on and to even try to make a case for Islam. And I would just wish that people would take my appeal to please read this book not from a believer's eyes or believing lens, but from a critical lens, because it is exactly not what you think it is. And I've realized, like, as soon as you look at Islam from a critical lens, it crumbles. It has so many holes in it that once you find out these things, there's no going back. So I was also extend, like, I am open for discussion on these topics. Would love to have a back and forth. I'm open to that as well. And like I said, like, if Farid wants to talk about Surah Fakaf and the Surah, like, get challenged, be my guest. And like, I'm open talking to others as well. But at least be thorough, okay? And like, try to examine the footing, the foundation you're building your whole epistemological framework on. So at the end, I want to just final summary is you have a book whose, it's not very eloquent, it's disjointed, it's hard to understand, it's very confusing, its preservation is shaky, it's full of absurd mythology, it's scientific inaccuracies, ridiculous moral injunctions. And on top of that, the guy who's propagating the book is snorting like a camel, seeing rocks and trees talk, and exhibiting signs of complete epilepsy. How can this be from God?
How can it not?
Or I guess maybe God just talks to epileptics. Who knows? You know?
Coincidence, right? The ones with headaches and seizures and okay, well, that was an amazing that was 2 hours of jam-packed information, and it was a lot to take in, I know. If you are one of those people having doubts about Islam, just take that as a good thing and take the time to look into these doubts. And there's a wealth of research now. You know, things have become a lot easier with the internet to look into, to research. There's books and podcasts and videos you can watch, Facebook posts. We'll try to get Abdullah Gondal all the links. I'll try to get all the links from you so we can post them. I'll share his Facebook link as well. Not so active on Twitter just yet. And a lot of people are asking when you're going to start your channel.
Well, it was planned to be started last year. It's just that I got caught up, you know, life and school and moving, so a bunch of things. But maybe this summer, hopefully this summertime, after I'm like settled down and I have a more stable life. Yeah, for sure. Definitely plan on doing something for sure.
Perfect. Okay, everyone, that's a wrap. Thank you so much. And to everyone who donated as well, that was very kind of you. Most appreciated. Abdullah Gondal, thank you so much. Amazing presentation. Looking forward to the neuroscience and Muhammad presentation when it's ready.
All right. Well, it's amazing to be here back again, and hopefully there'll be lots more to come. Thank you for having me on your channel and giving me this opportunity. I hope this reaches out to more people and a lot of people that it was intended for. I hope Farid watches especially the part where I talk about the Surah Like It and how the Surah Al-Kahf challenge was designed to backfire, and it did. Supplementary things I would like people to watch would be the Meccan Poet video that we both uploaded. I recited pre-Islamic poetry, contemporary poetry from Muhammad's time. There's another presentation that I did on the preservation of the Quran. It's a 2-hour presentation where we go through each manuscript and many hadith about missing verses, lost verses, changes, and whatnot, and then variations in the current Qurans. Then there's another presentation I did that I'd highly recommend. It's called "Is Islam a Personality?" where we just focus on the convenient revelations and how Muhammad manipulated people. Either it be from you getting as many women as he wants to making people rub his spit on their face and whatnot. So hopefully I can get that neuroscience presentation out soon. And until then, peace, and hope to see you soon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.